No role plays, just real. Chris and Lorenzo share 4 decades of combined experience to help you become a more effective leader.
We've never really, as a workforce, spent a lot of time on making sure we're developing good leaders.
We'll be able to share stories, experience, mistakes, failures, successes.
This is Hacking Your Leadership.
Welcome to Hacking Your Leadership. I'm Chris.
And I'm Lorenzo.
And Lorenzo, we got so much amazing feedback from our listeners from last week's episode when we did our As a Leader series that we started out, that I kind of want to do the same thing this week. I'll do another one and see if our listeners get the same value out of this, because the feedback we just got was it was awesome. People were reaching out saying this is exactly what they want to hear. This is the kind of thing that they saw, practical application of it, not just leadership theory, but how they can put it in practice in their life. And we were answering questions that they had that they just hadn't even reached out to us about yet. But either way, we get feedback from every episode, but this one seemed to be maybe a step above that. And I liked it. What did you think?
Yeah, same thing. It was funny. I was messaging with somebody, and they actually started the dialogue with as a leader, and I just started laughing to myself because I'm like, yeah, it's such a thing now, and I think that's the heart of the podcast has always been is what can we talk about? What's the 1-minute hack? What can we give somebody that they can go do today, or they can apply whatever it is that we're talking about? And I just think that this feels right, as a means of communicating, what the podcast is about, what the title is about, the discussion and dialogue. So I think that we give these probably a couple of good runs here and get some out and continue to get some thoughts from our listeners and some questions from our listeners. And like I said, last episode we're going to be reaching out into our Patreon account and some of our community text message threads to get more insight and input in regards to these topics that people want to hear about. So I'm excited for it.
Yeah, I agree, and I'll say it again. I said it before last episode, kind of in theory, but I really think we're seeing this. Because identity is so important, because people tend to kind of weave their lives and the decisions they make and the people they associate with and the companies they associate with, where they spend their money, where they put any part of their lives into, those things have to speak to their identity, whatever that is. And the as a, fill in the blank, you could say as a about yourself, and there could be 100 different things you put in there. And, it just depends on, what part of your life you're talking about. But the importance of being able to do that, I think, is what's resonating with people. And I think that's why As a Leader is going to continue doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. No, like I said, I think it's going to be a cool, kind of a concept that we can work through in some ways that we can kind of position as the conversations that we want to have. So I'm looking forward for continuing it and expanding it, into maybe some other platforms as well.
All right. So for this week's episode, I want to ask the question, as a leader, is it possible to provide development equity?
Oh, that's tough.
There's a buzzword for you.
Yeah. I think when I hear development equity, I think of, are you giving enough time, or are you giving equal time to, all employees? That's the first thing that jumps into my head is all right, is everybody getting the same in regards to my time or my effort into their development? And I think a lot of that has to come down to size of team and your role as a leader. Are you a leader of leaders? Are you a leader of individual contributors? Things like that, because that's going to have a major impact in regards to how and where you spend your time and how and where you should spend your time. And I also think that, I think it's I guess my initial thought about it is the equity has to be in my attempts and attention to make sure that my people are getting what they need and my kind of passion and motivation behind it, not necessarily the equity of time invested. Because I think that also when you look at, people as individuals, leaders and individuals, they require different things. And some people, in new roles or taking on new things require more time. Those that may be more tenured, experienced, or in a different space on how they're, working through their leadership or their job, they need a little bit less time. Some people ask for it, some people don't. So there's a lot of factors there that I think from a time standpoint, it would be really hard for me to consider development equity as a measurement of how I spend or how much time I spend with individuals. However, I could maybe wrap my head around this concept if I'm thinking about my equity in regards to making sure that I am consistently providing opportunities and passion and intent around the development of my people from an equal standpoint.
Yeah, I think you really hit it on the head when it comes to the different levels of time and process and commitment you're putting into each of your people based on what they need or what they're asking for. And really what this comes down to is you talk about the difference between equality and equity. And if I rephrase the question as, is it possible to provide development equality? I would say development equality is much easier, but why would you ever want to? Why would you want development equality? You're going to have some people on your team who you're giving much more time to than they're asking for, than they want, or than they deserve. And then some other people you'll be giving a lot less of your time than what they need or want or deserve. The idea of development equity takes into account what the needs are of each of your people, and where you need to meet them where they are. And there are some people out there. I've had people report to me who are, for lack of a better word, they're kind of set it and forget it. I mean, they just have that. They have it, whatever it is, and they don't need much more than a monthly or even quarterly touch base to make sure that they're still on the right track, because they want to make sure they don't go too far off. But they don't need a lot of coaching. They don't need a lot of anything. And then there's some other people who they have just as big a heart. They want it. They want to keep going, and they want to grow. But they need that reassurance much more often than somebody else might. And if the difference between them continuing to engage or not, continuing to perform and be productive and bring their best work and do the things that you expect them to get done, if the difference between them doing that or not is just whether or not you're able to spend 10 minutes with them once a week or twice a week, I think as a leader, I have a responsibility to make that happen if I want to be able to expect that from people. And it's not too much to ask. It doesn't, I can't go into it thinking, oh, why can't this person be like this person who only needs one touch base a month? No, it's not like that. Everybody's different, and people grow and develop on their own timeline. And my job as a leader is to decide where I need to spend my time based on what those needs are.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great point that you make. And I want to underline what you said around like responsibility. And, it ties into my definition of leadership, which is, to be, personally accountable for the development of others. So what I mean by that is that the development time and the development equity the number is above zero. It's not zero. Everybody gets something.
Yes.
Right? It's just a matter of what is it between 0 and 100% of my time, and where is that person in their professional, personal career, and how are they performing? How is somebody doing with their job? Because that also helps to understand how and where I may spend my time with them and what the things that we're talking about. Because again, like development doesn't start with I'm good at my job and now I want to get great at my job. Development is ongoing. Development is a part of maybe like what you said earlier, which is coaching, which is, hey, like I'm here to help you with your professional development. What we're talking about right now, though, is building skill around making you efficient at your job, because maybe we have an opportunity there where you're not showing up or performing specifically, in your current role or as a leader of people in a way that is reflective of kind of minimum expectation. So this is development. It may not be larger theory. It may not be stretching you. It may not be helping you to maybe polish some of those things that you mentioned, like the set it and forget it kind of individuals or leaders, where they really just need a little bit of kind of consultation and perspective to help shape where they're going. But at the end of the day, everybody gets more than zero. But that beginning part has a lot to do with how are you, doing in your current role, and then after that becomes okay. Now you've done your current role to a to kind of an achieved expectations element. Now we can start to add more layers to it. Now we can talk about development of skills that are either maybe things that you need to be more aware of, things that you can sharpen to get better at. But I think that I just wanted to specify that part of it. Like as a responsibility as a leader, like you have to be developing your people. There is no 0 and then 100. There's only above 0 and then up to 100 in regards to your responsibility to develop people.
Yeah, for sure. There are people who have reported to me who they get development even though they don't want any.
Yeah.
And the reason they're getting it is because there are things they're not doing that they need to do if they want to continue to be employed, if they want to continue to have this job, if they want myself and my peers and their peers to look favorably upon them as just a contributing member of a team, there are certain expectations that have to be done. And if you articulate in your actions and in your words that you're happy doing what you're doing in terms of a role, you don't want to get promoted, you don't want to move up, you don't want stretch assignments, you don't want any of that, you have every right to be able to do that and know that no one's going to force you or push you into taking on things that you don't want to take on. But that assumes that you are meeting expectations of the role, of getting the things done that you need to get done. I think the reason why this gets overlooked is because there are so few people who fall into this category, which is the category of they are doing exceedingly well at their current role, and they also want nothing more than their current role. Like it's either they're doing really well at their current role and they want more, and you have a responsibility to develop that in them, or they're not even doing their current role well enough, and you have a responsibility to develop those people and coach them up to where they are able to continue doing their role. That is the majority of people, like it or not. Are there people who fall into that third category of, yeah, they're good and they don't want more, but they do their current job great? Yes. I just think that as leaders, we run into those people less often.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think it's imperative that we have that type of awareness of our teams and where they stand. And I think that to understand that, to truly believe that, like, you have to be doing behaviors associated with development. You've got to be having consistent, touch bases. Now, again, formal or informal depends on the individual. I think that there's definitely an element of formality that has to happen, but that can show up sometimes in larger meetings with your team. It doesn't mean, like, when I say formal, it doesn't mean like I have to sit down across the table from you and talk about your development right now for this amount of time. Like, yes, it's going to happen from time to time, but I think when you have those people and leaders and individuals in those categories where they are on their own path, they are down the road of knowing that they're working on themselves, they're looking for opportunities, they're reflecting on the work that they've done, they're working with their peers, like things like that. Like, you're really just kind of giving them more bits and pieces of things to work on, more levels of responsibility, more projects that are maybe outside of their basic scope of work, but it gives them a chance to go out there and shine and learn something new. And you're giving them that, and you're talking about what that looks like and why you want them to do that. And then you're following back up with them in a conversation that might be just, how is that going? What are you seeing? What are you learning? And that is development. And, so I think that sometimes you have to have both. You have to have the formal sit down, let's talk about it, let's build a path and a strategy together, whatever that looks like for you based upon the individual. If that's monthly, if that's weekly, if that's quarterly, if that's twice a year, whatever that is, yes, there has to be an element of the formal sit down. Most of the time, in my opinion, the formal development conversations are a result. If there's more consistency of those, it's a result of somebody needing more help at getting good at their job. That's just what I believe. It's just like that type of cadence typically happens when somebody is not doing what they should be doing, or not showing up, or not performing to the level that they should be performing to, where you're having these consistent conversations about helping them build structure, helping them build skill with quick, with fast amounts of follow-up and support and that type of thing. As those conversations, the formal ones, start to have more space between them, then those little informal ones that happen in between become just as important, but they're very focused on the thing that person is doing, or the extra work, or the expansion of the responsibility that you're giving them, where then you can spend time in that development phase of that one thing that you're asking them to go out there and do, versus this larger picture of building a strategy of trying to make sure that they are, competent in their job.
Right. I don't like checking off boxes. I don't like doing things that I believe are just because I'm expected to do them, but I don't see any value in doing them. But I will tell you that in the relationships that I've had with people in a reporting relationship where it's the strongest, the formal types of sit downs where you put things on paper, those have an element of just checking off boxes to them, because if the relationship is strong and the development is there on an ongoing basis, on a daily, weekly, or monthly basis, at a rhythm that works for both you and the individual, and they're doing well, or they're at least getting better at what they're doing, then the process of the formal process becomes, let's make sure that you're meeting expectations of your organization, like how they expect you to kind of document things, number one. And number two, that you're honoring the fact that this employee is putting work in throughout the year in these conversations and in the touch bases and the little things. And you have a responsibility to make sure it is documented on paper for no other reason than, let's say you're not there next year. And now the employee has a documented record of the effort and the work they've put in. Because if you switch to another company or to another role in the organization where you're not with that employee anymore, you're doing them a disservice if you're not there to say to their next leader, hey, check out all this great work this person's been doing. In your absence, the next leader that leads this person needs to be able to see all the work that's been done, and that formal process will go a long way to doing that. So you do have a responsibility to do that formal process, no matter how great the relationship and no matter how great the informal process is. Although I do think that if the efforts and the focus ends up being more on the informal process, to me that's an indicator that the relationship is healthier and that the development process is healthier. The instance that I want to bring up, and this is one that I've had difficulty with in my own career with people reporting to me, are people who show an incredibly high level of engagement and desire to be developed into the next thing, that whatever the next thing is. They want to get better. They talk well and speak well, and they get along with their coworkers well, and they want to grow, but they have a difficult time doing certain core elements of their job. And so when you start the development process with them and you're having these conversations about getting better, the conversation quickly turns to the other stuff they're doing, like how they're growing and developing and trying to do all this extra stuff. And it's like, wait a minute, take a step back here. This all sounds amazing, and I love this. I love people who want to stretch and grow, but let's remain grounded in the fact that if there are core job elements that are not getting done, those need to be met first. How do you do that without turning the employee off or disengaging them in your lack of desire to give them stretch assignments and stuff like that? Because the quickest way that I've seen employees kind of turn off and disengage is if you are so focused on those core job responsibilities that in their defense, they're not doing well. They need to get better at doing that, but still being able to pepper in those other things where they feel like they aren't just going through the motions and that they have other opportunities possibly available to them.
If they're not performing to the expectation of the role, you should be having consistent conversations with them. If you're going into a formal situation, sit down where you're going to listen to an employee talk about all their greatest goals and their progression and what they want to do in the next job, but you know that they have not been doing their current job, then that's a failure of leadership because you've allowed them to get to that point. And I think that's the part where it's so important that if there are opportunities with somebody's capability of doing the role, then that's what that conversation is about, right? And if you're doing those conversations over time, you don't run up against that wall where somebody feels like they should be focused on the next job. They should be clear that they're working on the current job. And that's why, from a development standpoint, that is so critical. I think what you're calling out, though, is an opportunity that happens to quite a few leaders, which is that maybe they're just doing okay, or maybe they're just below, and maybe it's not like I have the high performers that I spend my time with, which is like, keep doing what you're doing and whatever you need because I need those results. Then I have the very low employees that are barely coming to work and way below expectations. I got to spend my time with them to either figure out, are you sticking around or are you going? And then you've got those right there in the middle band that are maybe plus or minus 10% of the median of performance. And if you've got those and you're not having some type of a consistent cadence in engaging them to make sure they know where they stand, then you're setting yourself up for that conversation where you're on two completely different pages. And then when you're that far off on the pages, you're going to have that problem where you've got to work through that real dialogue and conversation. And that means as an owner, as a leader, maybe you have to own it and you have to apologize and say things like, hey, Chris, I am excited that you want to do the next level. Like that's a big part for me because I'm here and I'm accountable to your development and I want you to be successful and I want you to get that next job. So like 100%, we are on the same page and I want that goal with you. Here's what we need to talk about though. How do you feel you're performing in your current role? How do we measure success there? What do we see with that? Are we making sure that we are not only, performing in a way in our current role that is not only acceptable, but it's good enough that it's buying us some additional time where I can give you some additional responsibility. So let's start there in baseline and let's just make sure that we are both working towards exactly the same goal. And I think that that's something that you've got to do in that point if you've not done the pre-work leading up to it.
I completely agree. And with that, it brings us to this episode's 1 Minute Hack.
The 1 Minute Hack.
For this episode's 1 Minute Hack, here's what I want you to do. Anytime one of your people wants to talk to you about their development or their career growth or anything at all related to them wanting to get better or understand where they stand or where they want to go, the answer is yes 100% of the time, every time. You have to say yes to those times and to those requests. And the reason why that's important is because you are setting a standard and a level of accountability for yourself as a leader to say the answer absolutely is yes. This is my job. This is what I'm here for. You will get as much time as you ask for, right? Now, when it comes to the content of that dialogue, that's where you're going to have to sit down and plan for what that conversation looks like. Is this a conversation with Chris, who is a high performer that wants the next job, that is asking for more? I'm going to give it to Chris, and we're going to talk about those things that he can sharpen to get better at for the next role. If this is a conversation with Chris because he has these aspirations for the next job, but I know that maybe he has some improvement that needs to be made around his current job, I need to be prepared for that. I need to be ready to ask Chris how he feels he's doing, and I may have to reset and to get us on the same page in that conversation and dialogue. But the answer always has to be yes. And then you need to make sure that you publicize that's where you stand. And you get to say, hey, I want to be really clear with everybody. My role here is to be accountable for your development. So if you're asking for development time, 100% I want to have that time with you. We're going to have our formal conversations. We're going to talk about reviews. We're going to talk about performance. I'm going to do the things that we have to make sure that we're doing to have a profitable business. But if you ask for my time, let me tell you right now, the answer will always be yes. Here's what I'm going to ask from you. Be ready to talk about where you currently stand in your current role and current performance, and be ready to share with me what it is that you want to do next so that we can sit down and have that conversation. And what that does is allows them to maybe look in the mirror and come to you with what they need to work on, or they say, you know what, I'm not going to go talk to Lorenzo just yet because he wanted me to bring where I'm currently performing, and I'm not there yet. Let me work on that first. So anyway, that's my 1 minute hack and advice for how to work through this conversation to make sure that your time, you have equity of development, and it's being led by those who are asking for it.
I think that is a fantastic 1 minute hack. I think there are times when I would have opted out of talking to my leader because of not having the minimum expectations met, where if not for hearing those words, I would have been the first one in line to say, let's talk, because I want to talk about aspirations of the future, not about what's going on in my current performance. So I love that 1 minute hack. I also think, to add one thing to it, I think you also have a responsibility as a leader to, over time, look at who is opting in and look at who is not opting in, and you still have to spend some time with those people who have decided not to opt in. Just saying that you're going to say yes to anybody who asks, absolutely, that's a requirement. But you also have to, at least at some interval, spend some time with people who aren't asking, no matter what their level of performance is. They might not be asking because they think they're doing great. They might not be asking because they don't like you. There's going to be a ton of reasons why they're not asking. And I think you still have a responsibility to reach out to those people periodically and make sure that you're on the same page as far as expectations and what they can expect from you. Maybe they didn't ask because they think that you didn't really mean it. You know, there could be so many different reasons. So yes, definitely say yes to everybody who asks, but also make sure you keep in mind that you have to leave some time for people who aren't asking.
Absolutely. And with that, it brings us to the end of this episode. Check us out on Patreon, YouTube, and all social media channels and all podcast listening platforms. This is Hacking Your Leadership. I'm Lorenzo.
And I'm Chris.
And we'll talk to you all next time.